Hello everyone, this is Hossein Mokhtarzadeh and you're watching my program on strategy. The world is changing rapidly these days, so we probably need to adjust our strategies in life or our career to achieve our goals. So I ask experts about their strategies following or during pandemic. Today I'm joined by Associate Professor Jia-Yee Lee, who is the Enterprise Fellow at Melbourne School of Engineering at the University of Melbourne, with responsibilities in industry engagement and the management of the ARC Training Centre for Medical Implant Technologies, or ARC CMIT. Prior to this role, Jia-Yee was the Director of Industry Engagement at the Graeme Clark Institute for Biomedical Engineering, University of Melbourne. Jia-Yee has experiences in technology startup and commercialization, and developing government policies in health and medical research and in digital health. Welcome, Jia-Yee.
Welcome, Hossein. Thank you for this opportunity to be here, and I welcome this opportunity. It's great to see you online.
Sure. Thank you very much for, after all this, work, I'm sure that since morning you have been doing, so you didn't just take time to join me. So how's everything with the pandemic?
Well, it's been, working from home has been challenging in itself. So in the first stage of the lockdown, and working in the academic environment, we were all scrambling to look at how we can engage, how do we look at ways to work with our industry partners, how do we continue to connect with our students, and also how do we engage with our networks. We've all gone virtual. We're in an industry where networking is generally over coffee, and sometimes it can be quite spontaneous. So one of the challenges I've recognized is all those, sort of water cooler conversations that you and I might bump into each other at university. Well, that obviously that has disappeared. So the question is, how do we maintain that sort of water cooler conversation, that spontaneity, and working out how to do that is challenging.
Right. So is it going better, or have you adjusted now, or you're still learning?
Well, I'm still learning that process, but one of the interesting aspects of networking is that through LinkedIn. So sometimes I might get pinged to connect via LinkedIn. And one of the ways that I might stimulate a spontaneous networking kind of online conversation is to ping the person to say, hey, you've pinged to connect with me. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what you do before I connect you with my network, into my network. And therefore I'm filtering my connections as well, but using that as an opportunity to also learn about what's happening. Some of my networks or people that ping me might be from another country, different hemisphere. So it's always good to know that my borders are now at the moment within my study room.
But it's not just there.
And there's a world out there that
exactly.
that I need to connect with. Of
course.
So yes, my world has shrunk as a result of COVID. And my borders are now literally a 4x4, which is my study.
Yeah, I know. It's actually you brought quite many different ideas, speaking about LinkedIn, what's happening in the world. And so you just reminded me of the challenges that many people face these days about like job hunting, of course. So we are quite lucky in Australia that still the government is supporting to some extent, yes, many people, but there are many issues all over the world, of course, and this pandemic is not really going down. And you are a virologist, right? So I have a lot of questions, but let's just get back to this LinkedIn first. So what's your advice on people who are really searching for jobs these days?
Yeah, so I have been engaged in some conversations. People from LinkedIn have pinged me spontaneously to basically say, hey, can I connect with you? They have either been recent graduates, some of them graduates from University of Melbourne, some of them graduates through the Department of Biomedical Engineering, through the Masters of Engineering at Melbourne School of Engineering itself. wanting to have conversation about where to from here. So they are generally conversations that I would normally have if I was on campus anyway. You know, people cold call me, but it makes it more interesting to have it online as well. But the questions are very similar. How do I make myself known? How can you help me connect? Or what can I do given where I am today? And the questions I ask is, of course, what is their area of interest? What is their professional as well as personal interest? Because these days, you know, work-life balance, or there's a blurring of that, and COVID has I guess facilitated even more this blurring of work and home, because work is now home and home is now work, right? So having those conversations are really important as a kickoff to understanding where that person would like to go. And sometimes it can go off on a tangent. So some of those conversations might lead to things that she or he had not even thought about, because when you bring in that personal dimension as well. Yeah, so it's been a rewarding experience. I'm also involved in mentoring students. So I'm part of University of Melbourne's alumni mentor program. So I have a mentee at the moment that I'm mentoring. Again, having those similar conversations. So the mentee currently is second year university student, undergraduate, and again, going through those similar questions. You know, what are your personal interests, as well as what is your current study interest, and what areas that might be of interest in looking at majoring, you know, and also looking at what is the prospective career pathway, because for example, biomedical sciences, the career pathways are so varied and diverse. So if I look at my own personal career pathway, I started life as a medical researcher, as a virologist. But in the last 15 years, I've really branched out since I did a degree in Masters of Business Administration. I really left research, hung up my lab coat, or I swapped my lab coat for a suit. You know, I gave a talk.
You missed it or not?
I don't miss the research, but I do. You know, I'm very thankful for the years that I have spent doing research, because without that, I wouldn't have acquired the level of expertise and knowledge that I have. It helps when you do research and you work in a laboratory environment. There are many inherent skill sets that you kind of by osmosis bring into a business or a commercial environment, and that is generally, it takes me a while to process and go, oh yeah, you know, these
that would be.
They're the underlying skill sets that I use when I did medical research. So I'm very thankful for that, and I wouldn't be able to do what I do today without the underpinning training and without the depth of knowledge in medical research, because I still use that knowledge base. I still use the frameworks, the knowledge frameworks.
I think this is Jai, amazing that you mentioned around what science or what you did in the lab has helped you, because you have done research, and then you you even got a funding from a NHMRC, I think, right? Yes. You have been leading that. You're a virologist, and then you actually did MBA. So you've done a lot of things, and your career wasn't like just once, like any other careers, not one single linear, pathway. It goes all over.
Yes.
And you just remind me of like those type of startup ideas, like lean startup, that they get the idea of hypothesis based, and then go about that and test it, and then if it works, yes or no, and then go about. So can you tell us about this one? What these two merges in your understanding of doing business or helping other people to find their own passion?
Right. Well, I think in terms of my own personal career pathway as well, I mean, when I was doing medical research, I was also working for an organization that I was working more towards becoming involved in management, right? And so as you take up more and more responsibilities and take up different challenges, that takes you away from, you know, the day-to-day of the lab, working in the lab, doing experiments in the lab. You end up facilitating meetings, you end up facilitating high-level engagements and so on and so forth, and facilitating how or assisting to bring people together to write grants or even writing grants for others. That's when I thought, well, you know, maybe I need to do something that is more generic in nature, not so much focus on my own personal expertise, which is very deep and very, well, not only deep, it's very narrow. So that's when I looked at exploring to doing the MBA. And once I started that and graduated from that, I hadn't really looked back because I met a whole bunch of different people. You know, the world opened up to me in so many different ways. And I was engaging with people from so many different backgrounds, from the banking sector, from the startup sector, the technology sector. And eventually, you know, I met someone who had started up his own business, and he was keen to bring me on board because we spoke the same language. We were on the same page in the way we saw things. So it's really important that when opportunities present itself, whether you're looking for it or whether you're there at the right time and right place, is to make sure that whoever you engage with, you share similar interests and values. So that's what it goes back to the initial question you asked, you know, what do I say to people about career pathways? And I said, I always ask that personal question. What are your values? What is your interest? Because ultimately, the person that you do business with must share, or if you're going to do a startup with someone, or you work in a business environment, you must share some value. The person you work with must share some of your values as well. It's not one way, you know. And so I was very blessed to be part of a startup where I shared some very similar values to the founder, as well as the product development manager. And so once I realized that they were people that I could get excited with, I was willing to get out of bed to go to work and drive to work, I took up that opportunity and left research.
It is really cool. I think maybe we can have later on one session just about your career pathway. But you actually nicely touched on the technology and startup, you know, and what's happening especially nowadays that having this pandemic all over around the world. So how do you see now what we can do in Australia to sort of, you know, of course, especially in Victoria, we are dealing with big issues here, and you know, compared to the US is still nothing, but yes, we're still, you know, having big issues. But how do you see that, or what should we do, or how we, in terms of both people who are just graduating, or you know, like a state level or government, you know, how should we think to sort of move on and more effectively toward more sustainable technology or like businesses?
Yeah, well, that's a big question, right? So if I were to break it down into little bite sizes of information, what I'm really delighted that, you know, in the startup community, things are continuing to happen. There's still investment opportunities to take advantage of. I'm seeing startups that are still applying to go to look at in you know, setting up overseas, for example. It doesn't dampen people's enthusiasm to seek funding overseas and set up their businesses overseas. So that's very exciting.
It's very positive. It's quite positive.
Yes, and then from the university perspective, if I wear the university hat on, there has been requests to engage with our colleagues, our engineering colleagues, because of clinicians and surgeons coming and approaching those with biomedical engineering expertise to look at, hey, we need some sophisticated device or accessories to complement medical devices so that they are better protected from catching SARS-CoV-2, right? So these are opportunities that have presented itself. So in the first stage of the first phase of lockdown, we were seeing colleagues who were approached by clinicians from major hospitals, and one of our industry partners, such as 3D Meditech. They are a major 3D printing company based in Port Melbourne, and they are an industry partner of the ARC Training Centre for Medical Implant Technology. I'm a co-center manager for that, and that's a training centre led by Professor Peter Lee. And 3D Meditech is a major partner of ours there. It's great to see them developing a 3D printed nasopharyngeal swab that they're looking to commercialize. They're in the process of getting regulatory approval because at one stage during the height of the pandemic a few months ago, there was a real shortage of these cotton swabs used to collect viral specimens from patients. And so these swabs are generally imported. And so 3D Meditech saw an opportunity. And so they then worked with the Doherty Institute to come up with a design that worked best and had it tested by Doherty Institute to see how well it was collecting the samples, whether you could actually dislodge the samples into a media that can then be used in a diagnostic test. So that whole process, it was very exciting to see a local Melbourne-based company engaging in new creative opportunities, learning the process of getting regulatory approval for a device.
That is really a great example of when you see a challenge, then you can see there's an opportunity or challenge itself. So I remember early discussions on when the very first lockdown, that the surgeons came to us and about some of the very basic things that they needed for their own surgery. And I saw how many people, and probably we both were in some of these early Zoom meetings. I see like 60 people on one Zoom meeting to help design things. So it shows that the challenges are there, the problems are there, and could be also turn into this kind of opportunities like startup situations. But there are some missing points right here. So can you explain? Can you just tell us, based on your experience currently, what are those missing points?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I find is that, as with a whole range of sectors are very siloed. So in the manufacturing sector, for example, it is also very siloed. We don't have a national database that captures the manufacturing capabilities, all the skill sets and the capabilities of companies, so that it allows very easily for surgeons or inventors, whether they might be at the inventors from university or inventors from hospital environment who are unfamiliar with the manufacturing sector, for example, to go into that database and look for prospective manufacturers. And also, it's helpful that the manufacturers themselves might look for additional partners because they're looking to pivot. So if you're a company that is selling particular plastic mold, injection molded devices, for example, or products, you might be wanting to look for another partner to develop new opportunities and to be able to pivot into the medical device sector, for example. Well, I'm not aware that there is a national database that the general public can go in and log in and search, right? It could be very high level. I don't know, maybe there is one there, but it's not commonly known. But it would be helpful to have that kind of database to say, okay, manufacturer X works in this area. They sell plastic packaging in the area of food, and their packaging does X, Y, and Z. Well, if that was the case, the plastic that they use could be, they could pivot and use that plastic in a medical device sector, for example.
Is there such a thing abroad in another country? Have you seen anything like this?
I'm not aware. I think developing these kinds of central database or central repository requires, you know, a government approach.
Yep.
To capture that, because it requires funding from government.
Yeah,
it's
of
not
course.
something that a private sector would fund, but it would be something that a government agency might play a role in funding.
But I'm kind of like feeling there should be some sort of manufacturing, like a organization, you know, or like a union type of things that they all get together. I think every discipline has their own sort of
Yes.
Organization type, so that they get together. Maybe this is not something that's nowadays that you see the opportunities out here in medical devices, but you don't see the link between manufacturers. That because I hear a lot, like when was it, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to radio, and Virginia Teroli was talking about like manufacturing, and there were lots of manufacturers calling and saying that, oh, we basically have nothing to do, you know, and they were looking for opportunities. But interestingly, there are a lot of opportunities out there, at least in medical.
Yes. Well, the government
sector.
do fund these growth centers, right? So there is the medical devices and pharmaceutical growth center called MTP Connect. There's also the advanced manufacturing growth centers, and other growth centers. I think there's 6 and 7 of them funded by the federal government. They all have a role to play. I guess in that COVID environment, it's looking at reviewing what that role could be and how we can best streamline some of the gaps that we see. So one of the challenges is, for example, there was a great a need for PPEs. And so we were seeing people with even domestic 3D printers printing out PPEs, right? And supplying them. And we're hearing surgeons or clinicians going to Bunnings to buy plastic, or, you know, to create their own PPEs, and things like that. Yes. So there's lots of creative energy. How do we turn that creative energy into a more streamlined approach at that manufacturing level? And how can we get our entrepreneurs that are from another completely different sector, let's say the clinical sector, engage with the manufacturers? There's some gaps there. And also, when we make medical devices, it's not just standalone. Medical devices are used in hospitals in conjunction with medicines, right? So mapping that entire kind of patient or a device journey and treatment journey is really important. So, for example, there was a great need for ventilators.
Still there is, I guess, right? Still.
Well, we have a stockpile. We have a good stockpile of ventilators now.
But I mean, all over the world, probably, there's still across the world.
Yes, and also, but the question is understanding the fact that we might have the ventilators, but if we don't have the drugs to sedate the patients, if let's say the drug to sedate the patients ran out, how can you use the ventilators then, right? So it's that understanding, doing the gap analysis to say what are the shortages in medicine that would impact us as a result of COVID, and doing that mapping process. Because it's all very well to jump on and produce ventilators.
Exactly. Yep.
But if you don't have the medication to sedate the patient, so that the procedures can be done for them to use the ventilators, then you can't use those ventilators.
That's actually it's a really interesting point you brought up again. This you're talking about this framework that needs a lot of different disciplines, basically. And of course, on top of it, like a government or another organization sit down to really know what's going on from the patient need all the way to the device and whatever is needed. So that's reminds me of like a proper management or managing the whole process. what my experience showed that the early, the first lockdown, basically I understood that there was a need and there were lots of people who could help, but there was like a rush that there was no management. And I was like seeing that, oh my God, what's happening? So if it doesn't, if you have something, you want to do something, if you put lots of people on it, that not necessarily work effectively. So more is not necessarily more productive. Sometimes less is more, right? So I'm seeing that there is a more of a manager, like from the technical point of view, you have great engineers. You can actually go ahead and produce and make things happen, right? But if you don't know where you want to head, so what? Is this a big problem or no?
Well, I think when you're in the midst of a pandemic, there are lots of unknowns. And so there's lots of, we can look back and there are lots of lessons learned and ongoing lessons to be learned from this whole experience. We're all thrown in and there are lots of so many unknowns, right? And so there are, when I think about lessons learned, it's and break it down into categories. You can look at what are the governance roles. Sure, we've got all the expertise, the technical expertise. We don't doubt that, whether they're at the clinical level, whether they're at the manufacturing level, and so on. But what is the governance level to create a working environment to connect people?
Exactly.
What are the frameworks of engagement where we can streamline that process better, so that we can streamline the conversation with regulators like the TGA, we can streamline engagement with the Commonwealth, the Department of Health, we can streamline engagement with Department of Health and Human Services in Victoria. So individual states and territories have their own respective departments of health. How do we streamline that? Because the hospitals are being managed. So our public hospitals are managed by the Department of Health in some way. And so how do we engage? So all those levels of communication needs some sort of integration and coordination.
Exactly.
So I look back, governance framework, coordination, these are major challenges.
Yeah, and I totally agree. Yeah, with my little experience, I can see that, very well-defined framework, how it can, so it actually teaches us what to do, and hopefully we learn this lesson for the next pandemic, because it's not going to be the last pandemic or or the challenge we face. So I have a lot of questions, but it's around like 30 minutes we're talking. Maybe I'll ask my last question, and hopefully we can invite you again to chat more. So what do you have anything that you want to you want to say to someone now that will basically accelerate our recovery from this pandemic? Do you have anything that, no one is doing this now, I wish this would have happened? Is the question clear?
Yes. Well, I still think that there are many issues that continue to be challenging, and I think one of them is that concept of, we don't have integrated data repository for a whole bunch of things. There still needs to be some level of coordination at the manufacturing level. How do we expose our those who are not familiar with the manufacturing sector to understand and have greater connectivity or intersection with the manufacturing sector? That type of information is just not publicly available, that people can, log in, register and log in and say, yeah, I've got an idea, but I need to source a manufacturer. I think that having something like this would be valuable, as well as educating the clinical sector about a bit more education to understand the commercialization process of medical devices. I mean, there are lots of great programs around at the moment funded by the Commonwealth, such as MTP Connect, the Bridge Tech program, which you've been involved with. and so on. But there are programs, but these programs are only made available to, from the university sector.
Sure.
So there are many other sectors not privy to access these types of programs.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be good to have programs like that more widely available to hospital workers.
Yeah, I totally agree. So if I summarize it, one of your major points is the education for basically all and easily accessible, and then really streamlined framework so that everyone could get to the point that they need to go, basically, and the governance, basically how they put them together. And of course funding around this would always be appreciated, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate. Thank you very much, Jia-Yee. Is there anything that you wanted me to ask you and you wanted to talk about? Is there anything left that you wished that I asked you?
I think you've asked some fantastic questions there, Hossein.
My
I
pleasure.
really, as I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you at this level, and really thank you for your time
Thank
and
you.
having a
It's very
chat
kind
with
of you.
me
Cheers.
as
Very kind
well.
of you. Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. You actually give a really great insight, especially in this pandemic, and from basically people who I know that you help a lot of people who come to you, and you mentor them, as you mentioned, and in your center, basically trying to facilitate many things with the manufacturing as well as the clinicians, medical device, and all sort of. So it's a lot. You guys are so busy. So well done, and thanks again. This was my conversation with Associate Professor Jia-Yee Lee. Have a wonderful day, and I say goodbye. Cheers.
Thank you.